Hello everyone, Goldrook here with a Legacy Doomsday League. We recently had a banning, and I thought I'd jump into the pools and give this deck a shot again. Thought I'd go over the list before we get started. For the most part, it's pretty standard. I think the variation you see these days happen with the number of cyclers, the number of multi-draw spells, unearth, the discard split, whether or not you play days, and I think that's about it. Actually, there's also the preordain, which seems to be replaced by personal tutor in some lists. I did not hear about this personal tutor list until about a couple days ago, and I didn't feel like trying it out. I have tried 2 or so before and just wasn't particularly impressed. I think this deck can play fairly resilient, and so preordain does give you a few more options. I do see the argument behind playing personal tutor and having a quicker win set up for you, but for this league I settled with the 4 preordains. As far as the discard spells go, thought I'd go with 3 Thoughtseize, 1 Duress. I preferred to go Thoughtseize this time around, simply because I wasn't too sure what the metagame is going to look like. I felt like Duress, while it doesn't cost you 2 life, is a little narrow for an unknown field. As far as the cyclers go, Edge of Autumn and Street Wraith, I chose to play just 1 of each. I really don't like seeing these cards in the neutral game, if you will, and so I really want to minimize the number of sorts of cards I have in the main deck. You're already paying a ton of life with Thoughtseize, some with Force of Will, some with your fetch lands, and I really don't want to be cycling this card just to see another one. It influences your decisions and what hands you end up keeping, and so for this league I just stuck with 1 and 1. Moving on to Predict and Unearth, you'll notice that there isn't an Ideas Inbound in this list. I chose to stay away from Ideas Inbound this time for the same reason I cut down on Street Wraith effects. I'd rather have cards that I could cast reliably. Now, I say that, and I hear play an Unearth. This last slot was mostly filled with this card due to uncertainties. I figured worst case scenario, it cycles and I could get rid of it, but as you'll see in the rounds to come, it really doesn't come in handy, and I definitely look forward to cutting this card moving forward. Onto the sideboard, I anticipated a fairly unfair field, and so I wanted my Flusterstorms and my Surgical Extractions. Dredge and Black-Red Reanimator are fairly tough matchups, so I want to make sure I'm prepared. Fatal Push, just in case I saw any Thalia decks running around, and Massacre is there for the same reason. I settled with a red splash this time around. I didn't feel like green was appropriate. I felt like Pyroblast did more in an open meta than Veil of Summer, and usually in the Abrade slot we have Abrupt Decay, but this time around I just went to Abrade, to Echoing Truth. To fill out the sideboard, I added 2 Baleful Strix. This is mostly for the Delver matchup. It is perhaps the deck's toughest matchup, and this one helps out quite a bit, and so I thought I'd give 2 a shot in the board. Alright, well, that's about it for our 60. Let's move on to our matches. Round 1, I start out, let's see, I'm on the play. This hand's pretty unkeepable. It's just a bunch of mana and a Thoughtseize. I didn't think that this would go anywhere, so I ship it away. This one, it's not a good hand. This hand has a mix of mana, a cantrip, and a couple of defensive spells. And I figured the Cavern of Souls would be the obvious pick to be the one to put on the bottom, so I keep the 6. And I start out with a Ponder. What I'm looking for here is either Doomsday itself, or a setup of lands and more cantrips. I fetch Basic Island. Basic Island here was probably wrong, but again, I'm playing into an unknown field, and this is my first match back, so I guess I play a little conservatively here. I do see Lotus Petal Preordained Swamp, which, qualifies for 2 out of the 3 that I'm looking for. So I put from bottom to top, Petal, Preordain, and Swamp. I could have arguably drawn Preordain, so that I had 2 other blue cards to pitch to both Force of Wills, just in case I saw something unfair. But I figured I had the days, so I went ahead and drew the Swamp. Okay, this is never a good look. For one, I can't daze this, and Force of Willing it doesn't really put me in a better position. So I let it resolve. I'll just wait for his follow-up and see if it's worth Force of Willing. They go ahead and fire off a Faithless Looting here, and it's quite possible that this was thrown out as a bait. But I figured I'd Force of Will it anyway. This card allows them to draw 2 and put 2 in the yard, which I think is fairly strong for their strategy, and the very least I could do is slow that down, so I decided Force of Will this Faithless Looting here. We draw this Preordain, and at this point we're just looking for perhaps a discard spell, maybe another Daze, maybe Doomsday, but I see neither of those cards. Put these on the bottom, draw a Scalding Tarn, just pass. Dark Ritual's never a good sign, and this probably spells death, so I go ahead and scoop. Moving on to game 2. As you might have saw, my first hand was a no-lander, so I go ahead and ship that back. This 6 looks pretty good. I think Thassa's Oracle is the card you put on bottom here. Now, there are instances where you want to keep Oracle in your hand, and that's usually when you have Brainstorm, simply because you could Brainstorm the Thassa's Oracle back into the pile. But since we're mulliganing, I think we have an obvious choice here. And just go ahead and lead off with a Thoughtseize. Now, over here we see Chromox, Collective Brutality, Entomb, Thoughtseize, Unmask, and Badlands. At this point, I'm prioritizing casting my own Doomsday so that I get set up for a win. And so I figure Chromox and Unmask both take 2 cards. I think their most valuable card here is Thoughtseize, so I go ahead and take that. Our opponent commits to the Chromox, exiling Unmask, playing a scrub land, so we have perfect information here. Sure enough, our opponent entombs, we take the Collective Brutality, and go ahead and ponder. We see land, Flusterstorm, Ponder, I felt like I could have done better, so I go ahead and shuffle and draw a Dark Ritual, which isn't bad at all, as if we are allowed to untap, we could go ahead and win. Unfortunately for me, our opponent top decks a Reanimate, puts Iona into play, names blue, and ends the game. On to round 2. This hand looks pretty solid, as we have land, Thoughtseize, and Daze, as well as a couple of key cards, Brainstorm, Predict, and Doomsday. Another Bloodstained Mire, which can be good for us. For this Thoughtseize, we see Exhume, Lotus Petal, Reanimate, Tendrils of Agony, and a Polluted Delta. I take Reanimate in hopes that they somehow mess up and silently prepare for game 2. This opening 7 isn't particularly strong, it's a little slow. In retrospect, the Thoughtseize could just be disruptive enough, allowing me to untap Preordain and look for either a combo piece or a piece of disruption, but I think I mulligan this hand. For this hand, we see land, 2 discard spells, and a Daze. I'm feeling pretty good at this point. All we need is to find some mana and Doomsday itself. This Thoughtseize sees Dark Ritual, Exhume, Faithless Looting, Gristlebrand, Lotus Petal, Unmask, and Polluted Delta. I think I'm pretty dead here, so I just kind of cross my fingers and hope that they mess up. But they don't. And just like that, we finish 2 quick rounds of Magic. Moving on to the 3rd round, I open with a pretty solid hand. All this hand is looking for is a black source, so I go ahead and fetch Underground Sea, Preordain. And I basically see everything I need. I see a Dark Ritual and a Force of Will. I decide to draw the Force of Will and save the Dark Ritual for the following turn. Our opponent brainstorms on their upkeep, which I find very interesting. I choose not to daze this. I didn't feel like there was any reason to. I believe they shuffled off their ponder, so I'm not quite sure what they're looking for here. Our opponent doesn't react here, so I set up a pile of Thoughtseize, Edge of Autumn, Preordain, Lion's Eye Diamond, and Thassa's Oracle. The plan being to cycle Street Wraith to draw the Thoughtseize, and then brainstorm into Edge, Preordain, Lion's Eye Diamond, and then using that as a way to... It's a truncated pile, basically. When you cast Oracle, you'll have 1 card left in your library, but the hope is that the Thoughtseize clears out any removal spells, and you just rely on Oracle's devotion to win you the game. Cycle here, Thoughtseize. This Thoughtseize reveals Ashiok, back to basics, 2 Baleful Strix, and a Flooded Strand, so we're basically in the clear here. We'll draw the Preordain, put the Force of Will on the bottom, draw the Oracle, and finish out the game. Looking back at this hand, I'm a little surprised that I kept. This sort of hand places a lot of emphasis on the ponder. I was basically hoping that the discard spells bought me enough time for this hand to shape up. Lucky for me, I do draw Doomsday off the top, and here I just go ahead and duress and see if there's any counter magic I need to worry about. I see Confounding Conundrum, Drown of the Lock, another Back to Basics, and 2 Swamps, so I decide to go for another Pass the Turn pile. With the Ponder and the Thoughtseize, I decide to set up Lion's Eye Diamond, Predict, Cavern of Souls, Lotus Petal, Thassa's Oracle. This makes it so that I could Thoughtseize on the following turn, play Lion's Eye Diamond, and get into the pile with the Ponder. So our opponent casts Confounding Conundrum, drawing up to 4 cards, which means that there are 2 unknowns at this point. When I Thoughtseize, they go ahead and cast Force of Negation, which means that at this point, the only thing that I'm playing around is a Surgical Extraction. Lucky for me, that is not the case. Moving into round 4, I keep a fairly steady hand. So far this league, we've seen Brainstorm and Predict together quite often, which is a good thing. So I fetch early, just to play around Stifle. Island Pass is a little fishy. I decide to draw without brainstorming, and sure enough, draw another Brainstorm. Figuring I had 3, I go ahead and fire one off and see the following. The idea here is to put back Oracle first, then X, so that on the following turn, I could predict away the Oracle and draw into what may be considered more meaningful cards. And I decide to Thoughtseize here. Our opponent clearly doesn't want me to see what they have in hand in Force of Will, pitching a Silvergill pitching a Lord of Atlantis. This paradigm shift indicates that our opponent is likely holding Thassa's Oracle and a Cavern of Souls, but I just had tucked a Predict on top, and seeing as Force of Will is the only card to be going on their library, I decide to let this paradigm shift resolve, and instead use my days to protect the Predict that I intend on targeting my opponent with. So I let them flip their library. Of course, I name Force of Will, and pass the turn. Yet again, we see the pairing between Brainstorm and Predict. Cavern of Souls and Thassa's Oracle aren't that great in your opening hand, but I figured I had Brainstorm and decided to give this a shot. Not too much action so far. I decide to Brainstorm here on end step, just so I could set up a better Predict. But instead find something that I felt like could have been a win. My plan here is basically to cast Doomsday using Lotus Petal, Scalding Tarn, Underground Sea, and then keeping the Thassa's Oracle and Cavern of Souls in my hand, and then using Predict to mill myself out. This way I don't have to take any unnecessary risks. Our opponent at this point has only 3 cards. I think their best card here is Curse Catcher, their second best being Force of Will, but that one we could beat. Sure enough, it's a Force of Will. We force back. Here I set up a pile of Street Wraith, Edge of Autumn, Lotus Petal, and 2 Pyroblasts. And I do this only to hide information just in case our opponent somehow beats us on the following turn. It's very possible that they have a Thassa's Oracle in their hand and draw a Paradigm Shift. Luckily for us, it's just a draw go. I cycle through my deck. And I predict myself here. And I'm sure I have to make sure that I name wrong. Otherwise I'll just draw out and lose. Just for the rub-ins, I decide to name Paradigm Shift, milling a Pyroblast, and then casting my Thassa's Oracle. Moving on to the final round. I mulligan away a no-lander and keep a decent 6. I see Lion's Eye Diamond, 2 lands with this Ponder, none of which are good for me, so I shut those away. Yet another bad Ponder. This time drawing a Dark Ritual. I really don't want to cast Doomsday into basic Island Go, so I just pass the turn. Yet another Island Go. When I draw the Scalding Tarn, I fire off this Brainstorm just to see if I could find a discard spell, counter magic, or something to protect my combo. But instead our opponent Spell Pierces. This gives me the perfect opportunity to play a land, play Lotus Petal, Dark Ritual Doomsday into a past turn pile, and just hope that they don't have Force of Will. Luckily for me, they do not. I set up a pile of Predict, Street Wraith, Cavern of Souls, Thassa's Oracle. I decide to put 2 Predicts in the pile just in case the first one gets countered. I really hope it's not Show and Tell here. But instead it's a Tundra into a Narset Part of Veils, which looks really bad. Narset minuses, and our opponent concedes. This hand looks fairly reasonable, if only because of the Pyroblast. I figured that one of the bigger threats of their deck are the Planeswalkers, and I do want some way to interact with them. Preordain into a Ponder and a Swamp, and choose to keep both. I preordain into 2 more cantrips, and I decide here that I don't think I need them. I'm looking for mana and Doomsday itself, so I bottom both, and draw Thoughtseize. And rather than Thoughtseize them at this point, I decide to wait for their turn 3, just in case they tap out for a Planeswalker. This way they don't have the ability to brainstorm in response to the Thoughtseize and hide anything that I might want to take. I figured I'd Thoughtseize here because I want some of these cantrips to resolve. And trading this Thoughtseize for the Spell Pierce seems alright. I see a Ponder of Force of Will, Predict, and Volcanic Island, all of which are pretty good for me at this point. I put the Force of Will on the bottom so that the Predict that I would draw on the following turn can mill it away. And this volcanic island helps us cast Pyroblast, so I go ahead and keep and draw. Our opponent casts a Narset. We Pyroblast, and fortunately for us, they had burnt their Spell Pierce on the previous turn. We predict and see no action, but we're still in a decent position. Blue-white continues, as blue-white does, and dirtles some more. This Thoughtseize reveals Counterspell, Force of Will, Jace, and 2 Monastery Mentors. I decide to take the Counterspell to force him to hold on to Jace to pitch to Force. They put a Monastery Mentor on the stack, indicating to me that they've got nothing else left. They've got nothing better to do. I brainstorm in response, not because I have any intentions of interacting with this Monastery Mentor, but I just want to make sure that if they do decide to do something to this brainstorm, that they don't get an extra token out of it. Luckily for me, I brainstorm into 3 fairly good cards. Cards that I felt like I could win with, so here I just put back Lion's Eye Diamond, then Edge of Autumn. No, I think I put back Predict. It was Edge of Autumn. I'll Thoughtseize here to reveal another Force of Will, which I do take. And I go ahead and jam my combo. Naturally, they cast Force of Will. I force back. My pile here is Lion's Eye Diamond, a spare card, Street Wraith, Cavern of Souls, and Thassa's Oracle. And in this case, I just decide to put Doomsday as my spare. The idea here is to cycle Edge of Autumn to draw the Lion's Eye Diamond, cast the Lion's Eye Diamond, and then predict targeting myself, holding priority, cracking the LED, getting me through to my pile, and finishing out my last round. As a quick recap, let's take a look at the deck again. I think moving forward, I'm likely to cut these 2 Echoing Truths, this Unearth, and in this list here, to see, I've replaced the 2 Echoing Truths with 2 Tormod Script. I'm pretty sick of losing to Reanimator. And as far as this Unearth goes, I'm not too sure what I want in its place. I think it'll be easier to determine once I play more matches. It's likely that I just put in a Limbed Duel's Vault in this place, maybe a Personal Tutor, just to see how it goes. But overall, I think this deck stands a chance moving forward. And yeah, that's basically it.